Read and reflect. The bonds of human relationship are very strong. They are so complex that it is difficult for us to explain. Words and deeds have a soothing effect and they cement the bonds of relationship. Here is a story about the impact of words. Read on. The Price of Flowers. Prabhat Kumar, Mukhopadhyay. It was nearly 1 o'clock and I was feeling extremely hungry. So I made my way slowly to a vegetarian restaurant which was not far away in St. Martin's Lane. Lunch hours in London restaurants were not so crowded in those days. I found not more than 3 or 4 hungry people scattered around the room. I chose a table, seated myself, and opened the newspaper. A waitress came up and waited politely for my order. I raised my eyes from the paper, glanced at the menu, and told her what I required. Thank you, sir, she said, and went briskly and noiselessly away. At that moment, my attention was drawn to a table not far from mine. A young English girl was sitting there. She had been watching me with interested surprise but turned her eyes away as soon as I looked at her. The girl was 13 or 14 years old. Her clothes betrayed her poverty. Her hair hung in a heavy stream down her back. Her eyes were large. They had a sad expression. I watched her when she was not looking so that she would not notice. My lunch was served as she was finishing hers. The waitress brought her the bill. Bills are paid at the desk as one goes out. The desk is near the door. The girl stood up. My eyes followed her. As she paid her bill, she asked the cashier in a low voice, "Please, miss, can you tell me if that gentleman is an Indian?" "I think so," the cashier answered. "Does he come here all the time?" "Perhaps not. I do not recall having seen him before." "Thank you," said the girl and looked at me once more with a startled air and went out. It surprised me. Why? What was the matter? Her interest in me aroused my interest in her. When I had finished my lunch, I asked the waitress, "Do you know the girl who was sitting over there?" "No, sir, I do not know her to speak of. I've noticed she has lunch here on Saturdays." "Doesn't she come on any other day?" "I never see her on other days." "Have you any idea who she is?" "Perhaps she works in a nearby shop." "How do you know?" "Saturday is pay day. That is when she comes. On other days, she may not be able to afford lunch. Perhaps she does not earn very much." I was moved by what she said. The curiosity I felt about the girl persisted. Who was the child? Why had she inquired about me? Was some mystery the cause of her interest? Her poverty stricken, sad, and anxious figure took possession of my thoughts. On Sundays, all London shops are closed, so I set out to look for her after breakfast on Monday morning. I looked into the shops on the streets near St. Martin's Lane and especially the shops on Strand but found no trace of the girl. The week passed. Saturday came again. I presented myself at the vegetarian restaurant once more. As I entered, I saw her sitting at the same table as before. She was eating. I walked up and took the chair opposite hers, saying good afternoon. "Good afternoon, sir," she responded hesitantly. By making one brief remark after another, I was able slowly to start a conversation. At last, she asked, "Are you an Indian?" "Yes." "Excuse me, are you a vegetarian?" "Why do you ask that?" "I have heard that most Indians are vegetarians." "How is it that you know anything about India?" "My elder brother is in India. He is a soldier." I am not much of a vegetarian, I answered her question, but I enjoy a vegetarian meal now and then. The girl seemed disappointed. I learned that her only guardian was this elder brother. She lived with her old widowed mother. Do you hear from your brother? We have not had a letter from him for a long time. My mother is very worried. People tell that India is full of tigers and snakes and fevers. She is afraid something has happened to him. It is true, sir, that India is full of tigers. Is it true, sir, that India is full of tigers and snakes and fevers? No, I smiled. How could people live there if it were? The girl sighed softly. Mother says she would like to ask an Indian about these things if she can find an Indian. The girl looked at me with eyes full of entreaty. I understood how she felt. She wanted me to see her mother, but she did not have the courage to ask me to accompany her home. A keen desire to meet this people anxious mother took hold of me. I had not had the opportunity to visit an impoverished English home. I wished to see how the people lived in the country, to know what they think. Will you introduce me to your mother sometime? Would you like me to accompany you home? I can go someday. The girl's eyes brimmed with gratitude. Thank you ever so much, she said. It is so kind of you. Can you come now? With pleasure. It will not interfere with anything else you have to do. No, no, not at all. This afternoon is entirely my own. The girl was delighted. We finished our lunch and got up together. As we walked, I asked her, May I know your name? My name is Alice Margaret Clifford. Would you mind walking? She asked. Not at all, I answered. If it is not difficult for you. No, I walk home every day. I asked the girl, Do you come this way often? Yes, she answered. I work as a typist in the civil service stores. Every afternoon I come home this way. Today is Saturday, so I am off early. Shall I call you Miss Clifford or Alice? I am not grown up yet. You may call me what you like. I am usually called Maggie. She laughed. Are you very anxious to grow up? Yes. Tell me why. When I grow up, I shall be paid more for my work. My mother is old. Is the work you do is the work you do to your liking? No, the work is very mechanical. I want to work that will make me use my head, brain work, like the work of a secretary. We crossed the bridge and arrived at the Lambeth. It is a poor neighborhood. If I ever become a secretary, Maggie said, I shall take mother away from here. Did your father call you Maggie or Maxie? When he was very affectionate, he called me Maxie. How did you know? Yes, yes, I answered mysteriously. We are Indians, you know. We know about the future and all kinds of magic. That is what I have heard, she said. Indeed, I was surprised. What have you heard? I have heard that there are many people in India who have occult powers. They are called yogis. But you are not a yogi. How do you know that I am not a yogi, Maggie? Yogis do not eat meat. Is that why you asked me in the beginning whether I am a vegetarian or not? She smiled without answering. We had reached a narrow doorway. Maggie took a thin latch key out of her pocket and opened the door. She entered and said, Please come in. When I was inside, Maggie closed the door. She went to the foot of the stairs and raising her voice a little called, Mother, where are you? I am in the kitchen, child. The answer came from below. Come down. It is necessary to explain here the London streets are above ground. kitchens are often below street level. Maggie looked at me questioningly. Do you mind? Not in the least. Come on, I said. Together we descended the stairs to the kitchen. Mother, said Maggie from the doorway, an Indian gentleman has come to see you. Where is he? The old woman asked eagerly. With a smile, I stepped into the kitchen behind Maggie. She introduced us. This is Mr. Gupta, mother, she said. Mr. Gupta, my mother. How do you do? I said and held out my hand. Excuse me, my hands, she said, holding them out of me to see. They were covered with flour. Today is Saturday, she explained. I am making cakes. People will come to buy them this evening. They'll be sold on the streets tonight. This is the way we make our living. Lots of trouble. Saturday night is a time of festivity in poor neighborhoods. All sorts of things are sold from countless lighted pushcarts. The streets are more crowded than on any other day. Saturday is the way the poor are able to spend a little, for they receive their weekly wages. Ingredients for cake making, flour, sugar, fat, raisins, eggs, and so forth were set out in readiness upon the dresser. Several freshly baked cakes in tins were also there. Sitting in such a poor kitchen will not be very pleasant for you, will it? Mrs. Clifford said, I have almost finished my work. Maggie, take him into the sitting room. I'll come in a minute. No, no, I protested. I can sit here well enough. The cakes you make are nice ones, I must say. Mrs. Clifford thanked me with a smile. What kind of a country is India, sir? Asked Mrs. Clifford as she resumed her cooking. A beautiful country, safe to live in? Certainly, but not cold like this country. It is somewhat hot. Aren't there too many snakes and tigers? Don't they kill people? Don't believe that, I laughed. Snakes and tigers keep to the jungles. They get killed themselves if they come too close to place where people live. And fevers? In some places in India, there is more fever than in others. It is neither the same everywhere nor the same all the year around. My son is in the Punjab. He is a soldier. What kind of a place is the Punjab? The Punjab is a fine place. There is a little fever there. It is very healthy. I'm glad to hear it, Mrs. Clifford said. Her baking was finished. Maggie, she said, take Mr. Gupta upstairs. I'll wash my hands and bring tea. Maggie showed the way to their sitting room and I followed. The furniture was cheap and there was not much of it. The carpet was old, torn in places, but everything was extremely clean. Maggie drew the curtains back and opened the windows. There was a glass bookcase. I stood in front of it. Mrs. Clifford came in carrying the tea tray. A few minutes later, all trace of the kitchen had vanished from her person. As we drank tea, I talked about India. Mrs. Clifford showed me a photograph of her son. It had been taken before he left. His name was Francis or Frank. Maggie brought out a book of pictures he had sent her for her birthday. There were many pictures of Simla and the surrounding mountain country. On the inside page was written to Maggie on her birthday from her loving brother Frank. Maggie said, Mrs. Clifford, show Mr. Gupta the ring. Has your brother sent you a ring? I asked her. Let me see what kind of a ring it is. It is a magic ring, Maggie explained. A yogi gave it to Frank. She brought it and asked, can you see the past and the future in it? I had heard a lot about crystal gazing. A crystal was set in the ring. I took it up and examined it. When Frank sent the ring, Mrs. Clifford said, he wrote that if you concentrate on a distant person as you gaze into it, you will be able to see him and what he is doing. This is what the yogi told Frank. Maggie and I have concentrated upon it again and again because we have not had any news of Frank for a long time. But we have not been able to see anything. Why don't you try? You are a Hindu. You may be able to do it. I realized that superstition was not confined to India. I did not have the heart to tell the mother and daughter that the ring was nothing much brass with a piece of ordinary glass stuck into it. They believed their Frank had sent them a new and a miraculous thing from a distant land, a dream India. How could I shatter their faith? Urged by Mrs. Clifford and Maggie, I took the ring into my hand and stared at it intensely for a long time. I cannot see anything, I exclaimed, at last giving up. The mother and daughter were disappointed. To change the subject, I said, "Here is a violin. It is yours, isn't it, Maggie?" "Yes," Mrs. Clifford answered. "Maggie plays quite well." "Maggie, please play something for us." "Oh, mother!" Maggie looked at her in protest. "Maggie," I pleaded, "please play something. I am very fond of the violin. I have a sister at home about your age. She used to play for me. The way I play is not at all worth listening to," Maggie said. My entreaties at last persuaded her to play. "I do not know many pieces," she said. "What would you like to hear?" "Shall I choose something?" "All right then, give me your music. Let me see what you have." Maggie brought out an old music case bound in black leather. I opened it. Most of the pieces were light as like Goodbye Dolly Gray, Honeysuckle and the Bee, etc. There were a few really good though old-fashioned ones, things like Robin Adair, Annie Laurie, The Last Rose of Summer, etc. There were several Scotch songs. So I selected the Bluebells of Scotland and handed Maggie the music. Maggie played and I hummed the tune to myself. When the song was over, I praised her, playing lavishly as I thanked her. "Maggie has never had the opportunity to study," Mrs. Clifford said. "She has learned that she knows by herself. If her circumstances ever improve, I shall arrange for her to have lessons." On my way back, I was filled with astonishment. The incident touched me very deeply. 3 months passed. I visited Maggie and her mother several times at their home and took Maggie to see the zoo once. She rode the elephant, Indian Raja, like all the other boys and girls. How delighted she was! But no news had come from her brother. Urged by Mrs. Clifford, I went to India House one day and made inquiries. I was told the regiment to which Frank belonged was fighting on the northwest frontier. Mrs. Clifford extremely worried when she heard it. One day I received a postcard from Maggie. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Gupta, my mother is very ill. I have not been able to go to work for a week. We shall be extremely grateful if you take the trouble to come to see us. Maggie." I had told the family with whom I lived about Maggie and her mother. At breakfast, I spoke of the letter. My hostess said, "When you go, take some money with you. The girl has not been able to go to work for a week. She had not received any pay. It is probable that they are hard up." After breakfast, I took some money and set out for Lambeth. I knocked at the door. Maggie opened it. She was looking much pulled down. Her eyes were hollow and ringed. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Gupta," she exclaimed when she saw me. "It is so kind of you. How is your mother?" "Maggie?" I asked. "She is sleeping now. Her condition is very serious. The doctor says it is aggravated by her anxiety over Frank. There is no news from him yet. she may not live. I tried to console Maggie, drying her eyes with my handkerchief. Maggie controlled herself with an effort and said, I have a request to make of you, Mr. Gupta. What is it, Maggie? I asked. Come into the sitting room and I'll tell you, she answered. We tiptoed carefully into the sitting room lest the sound of our footsteps should disturb the sick woman. I turned when I reached the center of the room and remained standing there. What is it, Maggie? I repeated my question. Maggie gazed up into my face with beseeching eyes. I waited. Then she covered her face with her hands and wept silently. I was in a fix. What could I say to console this child? Her brother was fighting on the frontier. Only God knew whether he was alive or dead. Her mother was the only person she had on earth. If she lost her, what would happen? Where in London could this girl on the threshold of adolescence go? I pulled her hands away from her face. Maggie, tell me what you wish me to do. If there is anything I can do to help you, I shall not hesitate. Mr. Gupta, the girl said, I do not know what you will think of the request I am going to make. Please forgive me if it is very, very wrong. What is it? What do you wish to ask? All day yesterday, mother kept saying that if Mr. Gupta would come and gaze into the crystal, he might learn something about Frank. Mr. Gupta is a Hindu, she said. If only he would come, she said. That is why I wrote to you. If you want me to try once more, go and bring me the ring, Maggie. Of course, I will do it. But if you don't see anything again this time, I understood what Maggie meant. I was silent. Mr. Gupta, I have read in books that Hindus are extremely truth loving. If you could bring yourself to tell mother only once after looking into the crystal that Frank is all right, that he is alive, will it be too much of a lie? Will it be very, very wrong? As she spoke, tears streamed from her eyes. I thought it over. I am not very virtuous. I have done my sinful things. So I decided to do this. It would be at least of my offenses. Please, Maggie, don't cry. Where is the ring? Let me take a good look at it this time. If I do not see anything, I shall do as you suggest. God will forgive me if it is wrong. Maggie brought me the ring. I took it and said, see if your mother is awake. 15 minutes passed before Maggie came back. Mother is awake, she said. I have told her you are here. May I see her now? Please come. I approached the mother's bedside. The ring was in my hand. Wishing her a good morning, I said, Mrs. Clifford, your son is alive. He is well. The old woman raised her head a little off the pillow. Did you see that in the crystal? She asked. Yes, Mrs. Clifford. I answered without any hesitation. I have seen it. Her head dropped back. Tears of happiness welled from her eyes. She whispered faintly, God bless you. God bless you. Mrs. Clifford recovered. It was almost time for me to return to my country. I wished to go to the Lambeth to say goodbye to Maggie and her mother, but the family was in mourning. Frank had been killed in the fighting on the frontier. A month ago, Maggie had sent me a card with a black border. I calculated from the date and found that Frank had been dead some days when I told his mother he was alive and well. I felt ashamed to face Mrs. Clifford, so I wrote a letter to them announcing my departure and bidding them goodbye. The morning of my last day in London dawned. I was to leave before night. As I was breakfasting with the family, there was a knock at the door. A minute or two later, the maid came in and announced, "Please, Mr. Gupta, Miss Clifford has come to see you." My breakfast was unfinished. Maggie had come to say goodbye, lest she be late for office because of me. I took the permission of my hostess and got up from the table. Maggie was standing in the hall. She was wearing black. I took her into the adjoining library and made her sit down. "Are you leaving today?" she asked. "Yes, Maggie, today is the day of my departure." "How long will it take you to reach your country?" "A little more than 2 weeks." "In what part of the country do you live?" "I have entered the Punjab Civil Service." "I shall not know exactly where I am posted until I arrive there." "Is the frontier very far from there?" "No, not very. Frank is buried at Fort Monroe near Dera Ghazi Khan." The girl's eyes were filled with tears as she spoke. "When I go to that part of the country, I shall visit your brother's grave and write to you." "It won't be troublesome for you?" "Or inconvenient?" Maggie asked. "Why should it be? Dera Khan is not very far from where I shall be." "It will certainly be possible for me to go there someday. I'll write and tell you about it." Maggie's face was filled with gratitude. As she thanked me, her voice talked. She took a shilling out of her pocket and put it down on the table in front of me, saying, "Please buy flowers with this shilling when you go and lay them on my brother's grave for me." In my emotion, I lowered my eyes. The child had earned the shilling with so much toil. I felt like returning it to her, explaining that in our country, flowers grow in great profusion and do not have to be purchased. But I reconsidered. Why should I deprive her of the joy the sacrifice would give her? All that the shilling could have given her, she was foregoing for the love of her brother. The joy of doing it was beyond all price. The grief in her heart would be eased a little. What good would it go to what good would it do to deprive her of it? I picked up the shilling. "Maggie," I said, "I shall use the shilling to buy flowers and put them on your brother's grave." Maggie stood up. "How can I thank you?" she said. "Now it is time for me to go to work. Goodbye. Remember to write." I got up and took her hand in mine. "Goodbye, Maggie. God bless you," I said and pressed her hand to my lips. Maggie left. I wiped a tear or two from my eyes and went upstairs to pack my bags. Adapted, translated from Bengali by Laila Ray.